this is DS Jammers, and I'm doing research on behalf of the Mastermind Intelligence Centre. And we're here in a secret location, or I would say. No, not really. We're just here in London. Kindly, our guest for today is let us here to share some of his knowledge on history, and he has a speciality.
Specifically ancient African history.
Especially in ancient African history, and his name is Mr.
Harry Bourne.
Harry Bourne. Hi, this is David Jammers preparing for my forthcoming etymology lecture and researching on behalf of the Mastermind Intelligence Centre. Today we are in central London for an exclusive interview with the renowned historian Harry Bourne. Mr. Bourne has a remarkable memory, outstanding perception, and an insightful perspective on ancient African history. He also has an extensive collection of historical books, articles, and artifacts. Mr. Bourne specializes in maritime history and ancient African history. He has agreed to share his extensive knowledge and insights in various aspects of historical matters with us today. Mr. Harry Bourne has written articles on the Phoenicians in East Africa and the sea in antiquity, African floods, lakes and random matters, Africa and ancient Ireland, Africa and great heads across the world, African maps and charts, some historical and international comparisons between Africa and ancient waterways, Africa, Egypt and prehistory, West Africa and the sea in antiquity, West Africa and the Atlantic in antiquity, Africa, West Europe and prehistory, West Africa, Egypt and prehistory. Were African canoes seaworthy? To name a few.
On the other side, I go there for lectures every so often. I belong to Axel Service. I belong to Sunday for this part of history.
Oh really? Oh wow.
They do fairly good lectures there. Nothing with very much to do with black history. Except I don't know if you remember a name not related to me. Bourne is his surname. And he's just actually a couple of books being published. I can't remember his first name. I've got a book at home by him.
Okay.
Anyway, let's just shift on. I'm nearly go that way.
It was a great day walking around the streets of London with Mr. Harry Bourne. As you can see, this is the new Home Office building and the Westminster Children's Welfare Centre. Today we will be discussing ancient history, London history, maritime history, the origin of language, races, and have an exclusive look at Mr. Bourne's vast book collection on ancient African history.
It's a tiny side street, but that's all that's left of the what was once called the Bierlinger Marsh.
And that's what Anglo-Saxon days.
And you see this whole area, because there was even people, there's a couple of old ladies in fact that are still alive who remember in fact in 1937 people getting drowned at Westminster in this area, this immediate area, because of how low lying the Thames is. Again, because of the Thames barrier, people don't realise that in fact the Thames barrier stops an awful lot of rises in the river. Even if people didn't die, they would actually end up with property being destroyed.
Now let's sit down and see what Mr. Bourne has to say. My first question will be about ancient African history. Now let's begin. How did you get interested in ancient African
Well, I first started off being interested in Celtic history because I'm part Irish myself. All my grandparents were Irish. I started off being interested in Celtic history, Celtic maritime history. Then, as I was saying to you earlier, then we came down to looking to see what was going on coasts south of Africa, further south on the Atlantic, mainly West Africa. And I could find very little, except for a mention in a book here about there were sailors here, and I've got over. There are now 20 odd articles by me online, mainly on West Africa, but some on East Africa and a couple on India. and one in particular links India with West Africa. If you, I don't know if they show a map of Africa. Now if you look at
Harry Bourne uses an ancient map which goes up the west coast of Africa to show a clear connection from Nigeria to India, leading to the creation of the Afro-Asiatic language. So India is here in the map.
Yeah, that's the Indian Ocean.
And this is Africa.
That's the whole of Africa.
This is
the great chunk of Africa.
So this is how close India is to Africa.
India would be about there,
right.
Off the page, obviously.
Right. Yes. So that explains how the
Afrasian, but they probably were spread over land through Egypt.
Right.
Which, as I said, ancient Egyptian is an Afrasian language.
Then Mr. Bourne further explains that Indo-European is the movement of language from India to Europe. He then moved on to discuss the Coptic or Greek acquisition of Egypt by Alexander.
After Alexander died, what should this actually? It's my glasses. After Alexander died, his generals split up his empire between them, and Egypt and part of what is now Syria, Israel, that kind of area, fell into the hands of Ptolemy, and he gave rise to the Ptolemies. The most famous ruler of whom, in fact, was actually Cleopatra. And the old thing about whether Cleopatra was African or not is now reopened, because it looks distinctly like Arsinoe and Cleopatra had the same mother, who was African, which at the very least makes Arsinoe certainly, and Cleopatra probably, but not definitely, part African. Right. And you see, another interesting point about this is whether the Carthaginians, you see, there is an argument about whether they were African or not. Well, you see, originally the Carthaginians were Phoenicians settled at what is now, what became Kart-Hatshat, which simply means new town, which was Latinized as Carthage. They started off being Semitic, but were Africanized over a period of time.
But Semitic is where?
Sorry? This is pretty much what is now the homeland. Their homeland was what is now roughly Lebanon.
Right.
Only a tiny country.
Is Semitic meaning African or Semitic meaning
Sorry?
Semitic. When you say Semitic, is it African?
No. Well, there is. Yeah. See, you need to make an earlier African connection, you would have to be going back to the Paleolithic, where you're talking about 12,000 years before Christ. In other words, about 14,000 years ago. Because remember, we're roughly about 2,000 years from the turn of the century, BC to AD, or BCE to CE. I must say I prefer the BC before Common Era, as opposed to Common Era, because in fact, if you start using Anno Domini, which means the year of our Lord, you really are talking about Christian terminology, and people in Muslim countries especially do not like it.
Right.
Leopold Senghor, who was the first ever black president of Senegal, after the French left and it became independent. Him and three of Frantz Fanon, I think was another one.
Right, Frantz Fanon, yeah.
Were leading black intellectuals in France. They led what it was called the Negritude, movement. And Diop, in fact, actually went on a bit to talk about, the African origin of civilization.
Right.
Okay. Now, but in here he writes, and this is the point I was making about the Carthaginians. When the French did excavations of the Bourse in what the remnants of Carthage, or the Romans destroyed, you have Cicero quoted, "Carthago delende est." Carthage must be destroyed.
Yes.
And they razed the walls completely, and they sowed salt into the soil so they couldn't grow crops.
Wow, that's.
And the idea was to actually totally destroy. But the interesting thing is, something like 200 years later, St. Augustine of Hippo, which is a town in Roman North Africa, he actually is talking to people who lived down there, and they were calling themselves still Canaani, or Canaanites, or Phoenicians, because Canaan is roughly, if you look at your Bible, you'll see that Canaan in fact includes what is the extreme western fringe of which is Phoenicia. The rest of it in fact is pretty much what we now call Syria, Israel, Palestine. Right. It was a much larger area than just merely Phoenicia.
Right.
When they did excavations at Carthage, they found that the high priestess was an African woman. Now that came as a big surprise to the French, who ruled, let me put that.
Sorry.
Now, who ruled in fact Tunisia at that time, when they were doing those excavations. That came, and there's an interesting article. I've been in touch with a woman a couple of times now, but she would not put it back online. Who actually, a woman called Nancy Serwins, who wrote what I was considered to be a really interesting article that was in line with another article by a woman called Irish woman, Wendy Logue, about blacks high up in the religions of both of Cyprus and the island of Crete. And on Crete, when they did the excavations at Knossos, Knossos, they found this massive palace, and a man who had actually got himself knighted on the strength of it, Sir Arthur Evans. They found any number of remains, in fact, that indicated there was some kind of African presence on the island. Now this goes back to about 5,000 years ago, and again they had quite a high presence within the religion of the day, and that seems to happen quite a lot across the world. Likewise, Buddhism. If you look at the early Buddhas before before the Greeks invaded India and influenced Indian sculpture, they had this very tight coiled head. There's some ludicrous explanations, anything to avoid other than saying that they were probably, if not Africans.
Where did the name Britain come from then? Was this?
Well, there are a number of theories on that count. You won't know what is meant by P and Q Celtic, but there is a word, Brittini, that the ancient Greeks used, and Crutini, which is the Q. There is in Celtic, there is a linguistic distinction between those that had this K sound, C, K, Q. They're given that K sound in a hard sound, not the soft. You know the difference between Celtic and Celtic?
Yeah.
It's the same word, but just pronounced slightly differently. Right. Spelt the same as well. The P Celtic, you get Britain, which is where or P or B, which is where you get Brittini, and Julius Caesar uses the term Brittini, Brittani, Britain. And by the time of Ptolemy, which is in about 200 AD.
What's the Ptolemy again?
Give another Greek writer, but he actually refers to Greater Britain, not Great Britain, Greater Britain, Greater and Lesser Britain, by which he means Ireland.
Right, so that's where the Great Britain comes from.
Yeah, Greater Britain.
Greater Britain.
That was his terminology. Right. Great Britain, as a term, I believe, gets coined. So you probably, looking back to Ptolemy, what are we talking about? 2000, about 1800 years ago now. He wrote a book I've got on the lower shelves there. The big, thick world atlas of the world as he knew it at that time. You know nothing about the Malian Empire?
No.
Well, there are three great West African empires. Ghana, which is no relation to the present day Ghana, which was something 400 miles to the south. Mali and Songhai. Songhai is still the name of a fairly widespread people across northern. You've heard of the Sahel?
Just yeah.
No. Well, across the southern Sahel, The Songhai are people that spread along that sort of span. Probably runs through about 5 or 6 different countries, but you know, because the Europeans just shut the border through there. Your brother, one side, and you, his brother, the other side. Tough if the border runs in between you. You're now a foreigner to him, and he's a foreigner to you. You know, that kind of.
So how did they? What made them decide where the borders are going? Is it just?
That's somewhat arbitrary because somebody in London would sit down with somebody from France, or they'd go to the Englishman would go to Paris, and they just a border through there. That's it.
So it wasn't the people. It was just when they decided how they were going to.
They split tribes, ethnia all over the place. But the interesting thing is, very, very few countries have ever actually swapped territory since independence.
Since it's been laid down.
Yep. The borders, in fact, the Europeans left behind for the most part are what are still there. What they laid down, in fact, after the Berlin Conference, which is what led to the so-called scramble for Africa.
So what was actually the Berlin Conference then?
Now when was that? That would have been somewhere 1870-ish. I wouldn't swear to the actual dates.
What was it about then?
But this is when the European countries split up Africa, with 2 exceptions: Liberia, which the Americans had set up as something like the British had with ex-slaves. They just dumped freed slaves on the board, on the coast. There it is. Get on with it. No consultation with the locals. And there were several wars that have been fought through the rest of the 19th century into the early 20th century between the locals, who I think were Grebo, yeah, I'm pretty sure they're also sometimes called Kru, K-R-U, Creole. Now I'm not quite sure whether Creole is actually another version of Creole. Right. But no, for whatever, they were the local Africans in the area, in fact, and no consultation. These ex-free slaves, there it is, get on with it. And there were several wars fought between, on the one hand, US-supported ex-slaves, and the natives, in fact, weren't too thrilled about having land taken off them.
So what made them decide to go for the scramble for Africa? What was it about it why they all had the conference?
Exploiting resources.
There's the resources.
The old imperial idea all the way down the line, for long before the British or the French ever got their ideas about it, long before there was a Britain or a France. I mean, the imperial has always been about exploitation. Never mind. You see, that's another problem. In fact, trying to wish back onto the past, the mores of today, it doesn't work. People just don't think about that kind of thing. I mean, you would have been lucky, in fact, to be blunt. In fact, you wouldn't have been talking to me as an equal in my front room. You'd have been outside, in fact. But you see, there were some very educated blacks. Aladao Equiano, an Igbo from Nigeria, was one of the first. For some curious reason, they called him Gustavus Vasa, which is the name of a Swedish king. Might be quite how that worked, unless it was meant to be a joke of some kind. Because you don't get much whiter than in the far north of Europe.
So imperialism was this led to the scramble for Africa.
Oh yeah.
Was it any particular country or any just?
No, all the European, including Germany. You see now, the interesting thing about that is, if you look at what is now Namibia, what was Sudwest Africa with a KA on the end of it, not a CA.
So what was the original name for Africa then?
Well, if the theory, and you see, unfortunately, there are so many different theories.
Well, for what you've gathered.
Ifriqiya is...
Ifriqiya. I-F-R-I-Q-U-A. Really only refers to part of what is now Tunisia. But it looks as if the theorising is correct, it looks as if it got extended by the Romans to the whole of what became in Arabic the Maghreb, which is North Africa from west of Egypt right the way across Tunisia, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, and probably including Mauritania. That's said to be now what became Africa, but also is called Libya, because Libya, in fact, and you see the term Ethiopia, that isn't just a country that we now know as Ethiopia in East Africa. That again was another word used for all of Africa.
from a word, two Greek words, a kind of Greek compound of two words, ethios meaning face and ops. Listen, ethios meaning burnt, and ops meaning face, burnt face, black skins.
So that's where the word Ethiopia.
Which is word, and it's AITHOPIA, not EH as in the most modern spelling. You see, even Ethiopia, in fact, is truncated because the war.
What's S truncated mean?
Sorry?
S truncated.
It's now smaller in size because of the wars they had with the Eritreans. The whole of that coast of what was Ethiopia, well, is Ethiopia, they lost their entire coast. It's now Eritrea. In the 19th century, Bolivia kept going to war with its neighbours. Likewise, it lost all its coast.
Right. I don't understand that the Carthaginians named it.
Sorry?
The Carthaginians.
Carthaginians
named.
Well, they
the Romans, the Carthage, the land that they settled as Africa.
Yes, well, they fought several wars with the Romans, in fact, for control of the West Mediterranean, again, the trade, exploitation. But you see, eventually, in fact, the irony is, a Carthaginian ship ended up being wrecked on the coast, the west coast of Italy. And because the Carthaginians had actually got their shipbuilding down to a fine art that they numbered all of the blocks, the Romans actually designed their ships from that wrecked ship.
Wow.
And eventually went on to beat the Carthaginians at sea.
Designed the ships, yeah. Well, who were the Carthaginians then? Where did they?
Well, they're mainly Semitic. They come from what is now Lebanon.
And what's Semitic?
The Semites, it's technically a linguistic term, in fact, but it's been used as an ethnonym or ethnia.
What do you mean by linguistic term?
Well, it was a language.
It was a Semitic. It was a language.
Semitic languages are actually part of what are called the Afrasian languages. They in turn originate approximately in northern Ethiopia. Again, I'm bearing in mind I'm reading, it's been a long time ago, but somewhere around about the north of Somalia, Ethiopia, running into Sudan would be where the Semitic languages and the Afrasian languages that were the ancestors of the Semitic languages. The irony is, in fact, of course, there's now hardly any Afrasian languages left.
Where's Afrasian language?
African Asian.
Right.
Afrasian for short.
Right.
Sometimes called
I've never heard that term before. Right.
But they go under different names. But the thing is, in fact, Berbers from North Africa, ancient Egyptian, not modern Egyptian, which is mainly Arabic now. I'm just trying to think about Cushitic. Now, don't make mistake. You've heard of the name Kush?
Yes.
Which is roughly what is now the north of Sudan. Probably a bit wider than that, but in northern Sudan is probably roughly about it. Sometimes called Nubia. That's kind of area, in fact, is probably where these languages began.
You know, the Semitic language, you know, where would that be?
No, well, the Semitic languages, that includes Hebrew, Arabic, Phoenician, which is pretty much a dead language. I think there's still a few people that might speak it. Any number of, in fact, of the Iranian, I don't think is Semitic. No, it's not.
Where did it originate, the Semitic language from?
Well, don't you remember your Bible? The name of Shem, or Sem, sometimes spelled, but Shem or Shemitic, in fact, was a term that was a spelling that was used up to for a while. Shem is
spelled as in S-H-E-M.
Sem is S-E-M. Now you just put the itic bit on the end of it for that group of languages.
Right. Where was he based, or?
Well, as if you believe in the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, or where would the language have started from?
Well, I just told you, in fact, that's the Afrasian.
The Shemitic.
Yeah, I mean, when it spread out of Africa.
Sorry, well, it started in Africa.
Oh yeah, that's what I was saying. That's the reason why when they use the term Afrasian, that's why the AFR of Afrasian is actually the first syllable. Asian, in fact, it gives you then, because it then spread into Western Asia, which is including the Arabian Peninsula, We've got Yemen, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Oman. You've got the Trucial states on this side of things, all the way up to the border with Iraq and Iran. And you see just Kuwait, I don't know if you remember the first Gulf War, where in fact where Kuwait, Iran and Iraq all meet.
Right.
There's a very narrow piece of Shat, I can't remember what it's called now, but Shat something rather, which is an Arab meaning waterway, which actually gives Iraq access to the Persian Gulf.
Right.
That's the reason why they actually try to conquer Kuwait under Saddam Hussein, which of course the British and the Americans, the first Gulf War under Bush Senior, Bush Junior. In fact, we ended up with another war. That was the second Gulf War, with Tony Blair got us involved.
Right. Yeah.
You remember Tony Blair?
Yeah.
Thought you might. I do know the bloke, in fact, who actually coined the name the liar.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, somebody who attends the housing panel with me once every month in Westminster.
Right. Wow. So you know them.
Help yourself to a biscuit.
I'm okay for a minute.
So you know so because they said the language Indo-European. What is this?
Now that actually refers to the spread from India to Europe.
From India
to Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not the
there was a
original
series of
language.
related language. I think in the what am I talking about? In the 17th century, there was what's his name? Edward Lloyd, Welshman, discovered that languages over that period that spread had words that were similar. And when they actually looked at the words that were similar, they also found that the meanings were similar.
Right.
And they coined the term Indo-European, which includes Irish in the far west to Russian in the far east, but also includes when saying the far east, actually go further east than that. That's Iranian, what they speak in Persian,
Right.
it's Farsi in Persia. But also, in fact, the northern Indian languages tend to belong to it as well. Not the southern Indian languages. Now, they, interestingly enough, are the most Africoid-looking of all of the populations. You've heard of the Out of Africa movement?
No.
About the surmise from interpreting genetics, about 70 to 80,000 years ago, you had a series of migrations that were. I can only assume it's big because I don't know if you know, but the Sahara was once a very fertile area.
That's what I heard. I heard it was underwater, was it?
And that happens several times over a period of time. It becomes desert, becomes fertile again, becomes desert, and at the moment, in fact, we're in one of the desert stages. Whether it'll ever become fertile again, who knows? Anyway, the point being, as worsening conditions tend to be what triggers migrations. In modern day, in fact, you've got people, in fact, who in worsening conditions in Syria, in parts of East Africa, parts of North Africa. What are they doing? They're trying to flee to the area, in fact, that's actually most adjacent to them they consider the same, Europe. Unfortunately, in fact, most of the countries they would go through don't want them. That's very much the case. I mean, it's basically, and it looks as if it may actually end up, in fact, destroying the EU.
Right.
Because at the moment, in fact, you've got these very hard right governments running from Hungary in the west over to Bulgaria in the east, all in the EU, and quite frankly, they don't want any more immigrants, especially if they're Muslim immigrants. I mean, that's an aspect of this that people don't realise. In fact, it isn't just that they're immigrants; it's that they're Muslim immigrants. Hence the rumpus. I don't know which way you're going to be voting in the referendum.
Right.
But the point being, in fact, is the very recent, the last few days about Turkey. What was it? Too large, too many, too Muslim. That was actually said in. I remember seeing it on the box at least 20 years ago.
Is there something relating to the Ottoman Empire?
Yes. What is now roughly, you see, if you look at a map of Turkey, there's a tiny bit in the Balkans on the European side of the Sea of Marmara, but the rest of it is what used to be anciently known as Anatolia. That's mainly Turkey. That, and the Eurovision Song Contest, they produce somebody to go and sing, but then so does Israel, which is in Asia, not in Europe. Azerbaijan, which is in Asia, not in Europe. Armenia possibly just qualifies as Europe. But then when you've got Australia turning up in this year, I mean, how the hell does that turn up into Eurovision Contest? Meant to be for European countries. Australia's 12,000 miles away.
And where did you say the concept of Europe come from?
Well, Europe and all the...
Was it Europea is a Phoenician...
No, Europa is a... Hang on. She was supposed to be somebody who fled the Greek god Zeus as a bull. He pursued her as a bull. And she fled to...
was she supposed to be...
Greece. Again, I'm trying to... It's mythology.
The daughter of a Phoenician king?
Yes. No, sorry, the memory's gone. It's been a very long time I looked at Greek myths. Mm-hmm. Although if you ever get a chance, have a look at Robert Graves's interpretation of the Greek myths. Brilliant book. Don't bother with his white goddess, which is, shall we say, a bit iffy. But he's...
What's a bit iffy?
Sorry?
What's a bit iffy?
Well, shall we say
a bit iffy.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I didn't realise.
I look into that if I don't hear something, I've got an obsession to.
Thankfully, I haven't got my hearing.
I might have a worse set here.
Every year I have to go to the Royal Ear, Nose and Throat in North London because I can't have my ears syringed because of the drum. I have to have it glooped out there with the wax, right. Because it's like having a blanket over your head. And sometimes like a double blanket. Once the wax is gone, I can hear perfectly for at least 3 months, and then the wax starts to build up again. Right. It's just a condition of the family. We all got ear problems. My brother, my sister.
Sorry, you were saying so. The concept of Europe came from...
Yes. It's if you look at a map of Russia, you'll see the Ural Mountains run roughly separating European Russia from Asian Russia, or Asiatic Russia, more strictly I suppose. And the Ural that line, if you follow it all the way down into what is now Turkey, west of that line is Europe, east of that line is Asia. Right. And Kazakhstan is east of that line, so therefore it shouldn't be in the Eurovision contest, song contest. And Israel certainly shouldn't be, because again it's in Asia. But
so you know, I know you said that India went into Europe. Is that, you know, like we say here, Caucasian? Is that something to do with...
Caucasian tends to mean, the Caucasus in fact is a set of mountains.
It's not an Indian
no, Caucasian tends to mean whites.
Right.
It was a term, again I believe it was... you've got to bear in mind, I'm talking about from memory now. Mm-hmm. It's been a while since I looked at this kind of thing. But so far as I can recall, it was a term coined in either the late 18th century or the 19th century to describe what was euphemistically called the Great White Race. Right. Mm-hmm. Now that's interesting enough. When you see people talking, you heard of Flinders Petrie?
No, I heard the name.
Egyptology. Well, he's sometimes called the father of Egyptology.
Oh, really?
But the thing is, there was also Pritchard. Budge.
Yeah, Budge. What about
Emery?
Gardner?
Gardner, he's a little bit earlier than the others. Although again, he excavated. There's an interesting comment made by an American called Murdoch, who hypothesised a whole number of things in the late 1950s about African agriculture, and he actually makes an interesting comment. For every ton of earth that's shifted, other excavations in Egypt, a teaspoonful is moved in West Africa. There is so little until very recently. Interestingly enough, in East Africa, things have really gotten off the ground. There's been a whole spew of excavations running right the way down from Somalia, which they had to leave because of the troubles that have been there and up till fairly recently, down to Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique. Interesting enough, when I was saying to you just now about very few borders have been changed at the The one country that's joined the British Commonwealth, and in fact that actually was never ruled by the British, was Mozambique.
Right.
It's now a member of the Commonwealth. And that largely came about because of Mandela marrying Michelle's widow, whose name I can't remember. But anyway, she brought, if you like, Mozambique asked for membership of the Commonwealth. They were accepted.
Right.
So one country, in fact, that's in the Commonwealth. Now there are several countries that were ruled by the British that are not in the Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. Most of the Arab countries, in fact, that are running the whole length of the Persian Gulf, they've all left, including on the other side of from the Persian Gulf, Yemen, that left. Burma, which is not an Arab country, but is also, in fact, a country that the British ruled.
So how did Britain get to it, how accomplish what it did with all the countries? What was it about Britain in relation to the other countries?
Well, it was very much sea power.
Oh, it was the sea power,
yeah? I mean, because in fact, actually, with the exception perhaps of the Americans, the Royal Navy, in fact, was the most powerful. The idea, you as a ruler in, shall we say, one of these Arab countries, was maltreating British merchants. All of a sudden you'd end up with a gunboat being dispatched from London, and 3 weeks later, when they've actually got round, either come down the Suez Canal when it was dug and formed, or around Africa, which would take them for about 3 months. All of a sudden, the Zanzibar, how the British got Zanzibar was the Sultan, in fact, actually again was maltreating British merchants. They complained. The Royal Navy turned up, shelled the Royal Palace. An hour later, the Sultan of Zanzibar, you've heard of Zanzibar?
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's an island off what is now Tanzania. It formed the ZAM, Zan, is from Zanzibar. It's one of the Arabic words for blacks.
Right.
But East Africans, not West Africans.
Right.
Got a bit, but they are in fact of the same stock. Remember I said to you earlier about Niger Congo?
Yes.
Well, by Niger Congo or Bantu A languages evolve over time into what are sometimes called Bantu B, or just simply Bantu languages in East Africa. That's the people that's the linguistic group that the Zulus, Xhosas, and virtually all of the groups right the way across from the Herero in the west to the Xhosas and the Zulus in the east. Now, but with the exception of the San, they are virtually the only, except of course the whites have now settled there as well, they are virtually the only population in the whole of southern Africa.
Is there any truth in that the Jewish language comes part from the Bantu language?
The Zulu language?
No, Zulu, so the Jewish.
Well, there are a couple of books called Hebrewisms in Africa.
Yeah. No, I just saw it, so I just wondered if there's any.
See, what this is based on is there are a number of comparisons made between African religious practices and those of the early Hebrews. And the thinking was that it had to be because Africans didn't know anything better. So the thinking went at the time that the Hebrews had influenced.
Which Hebrews are we talking about? We're talking about the recent Hebrews.
The Jews.
Yeah.
They influence Africa all the way across, which is nonsense. I mean, when you think about the Afro-Asian languages spreading from Africa to become the Semitic languages that they are now, which are virtually the whole of West Asia, in fact, is Semitic speaking. The customs, in fact, divine kingship, incest between members of the same family, the royal family. Remember, that is famously best known, in fact, from the Egyptians. When you married your sister became your wife. The only other people that I know of that ever did that, in fact, and it's sometimes made as a point of connection, but the dates are so far apart, and they're thousands of miles apart as well, are the Incas in South America. They also went in for incestuous relationships with them, and again they married. And the thinking behind it is that only the members of the royal family are fit to marry other members of the royal family. So.
In closing, after a great, productive one-to-one exclusive interview with the legendary Harry Bourne, we find out a little bit more about the man himself as he reveals how he acquires his knowledge and retains information as he recalls personal experiences from his childhood days.
I think you got some great, really great insight. How do you keep? You got something with your memories there. It's just your interest, is it?
Well, you start with a curious mind and an inquiring mind, in fact. And you've got to bear in mind also, I've been at this for about 45 years now.
Right.
When you consider that my first 10 years of being out of work, between 1957 when I left school, because I left school at 15, you could literally wander from job to job. It sounds like fairyland these days, but in fact I know that because I did it myself. The first, I go to talk to my future. And somebody's actually said to me quite recently, if your life was taken all over again, would you actually go to university? Well, possibly yes. But you see, my mum brought up three of us on her own, because Daddy disappeared just after the war.
Right.
Bye-bye, Dad. Because I don't even remember him. I mean, my mum gave birth to my sister, because I'm the oldest of the kids. And my brother, in fact, Daddy disappeared shortly afterwards, as I understand it. I just cannot remember him. I know he was in the Royal Engineers. See, he was of Irish stock, but born in this country. My mum was. She was born in this country. So never. When you sometimes see players for the Irish Republic standing and they haven't a clue what the national anthem of the Irish Republic is, the Soldier's Song. I mean, they could barely, most English players could barely put the words of the national anthem, God Save the Queen, to their mind. But and you see, you heard of the footballer called Jimmy Greaves?
Yes.
Well, he actually once made a crack that if a player is seen in a pub with a glass of Guinness in his hand, he's classified as Irish. I mean, you can see the joke he was making, but that said, because of course the Irish actually have such a small pool of players, as he called them, and in fact actually England will be playing the Irish Republic in the Euros coming up very soon.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Oh, you don't follow football?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Are you a Spurs supporter?
No, well, that's my first where I live, but I'm a Man U. I'm a London Man U.
No, it's said in fact of United supporters that most of them live outside Manchester.
That's right, yeah.
The team that in Manchester usually is supported as City.
City, yeah. So we're the genuine Man United supporters because we're from London.
Well, the bloke I was telling you about who I actually founded the management organisation on this estate, he was a Bourne supporter, but he was born and bred in London.
Wow.
I mean, quite why he...
How did he end up there?
I mean, we don't know. I mean, his daughter, in fact, now lives in Wolverhampton, got married to a fan of Wolves, in fact, because they used to go to the games and things, she was saying, they married each other there on.
He's actually got a reason now afterwards.
Oh, take one.
There you go.
Action! Let me... Alice.
You've just been watching me, DS Jammers. Well, I must say, it's been fabulous spending the day with such a great individual willing to share a sample of his vast knowledge. And as you can see, Harry Bourne still has so much information to reveal. Thank you for watching the Mastermind Intelligence Center interview, filmed by Inspiring TV Production Company. Do you have a specialist topic or area of research? Contact the Mastermind Intelligence Center on 07497 069 702 or email mastermindintelligencecenter@aol.co.uk.